Welcome into Title Run. I am Alex Johnson, and this is Yards per Fantasy. Let's start with the top 10 handcuff running backs that you need to stash on your roster right now. One of these guys could end up being the reason why you win your fantasy championship. These are the guys with contingent upside. These are the league winners. We are going to start at number 10. Number 10 is Braelon Allen. Braelon Allen is the handcuff to Breece Hall. He would be higher on this list if the Jets' offense wasn't so dysfunctional. He flashed some upside early in the year, and he would be the bell cow if Breece Hall were to go down and get about 15 to 20 touches per game. He doesn't have the receiving upside that Breece Hall does necessarily, but he is a serviceable enough receiver out of the backfield. He's a big-bodied back who would be full-blown the guy in between the tackles, in the red zone, at the goal line. He'd be a weekly top 24 running back. And the Jets have the easiest or the second easiest schedule for running backs during the fantasy playoffs. They play the Jaguars in week 15. They play the Rams in week 16. And then in the fantasy playoffs, it is the Bills, who give up a ton of fantasy points to running backs. The number 9 handcuff running back you need to stash is Jonathon Brooks. Jonathon Brooks is set to make his NFL debut in week 12, but it's not going to be the debut that many people were anticipating. He's not stepping in to be the bell cow, to be the starting running back for the Panthers. Chuba Hubbard now has a stranglehold on the RB1 job in Carolina. So that makes Jonathon Brooks the backup and one of the handcuffs that we do need to stash. We do need to stash Jonathon Brooks. And most people have been stashing Jonathon Brooks all season long anyway, but with the news or just the obviousness that Chuba Hubbard is going to maintain the starting job in Carolina, some people are dropping Jonathon Brooks. Some people are dropping him. Don't be that guy. And if somebody in your league dropped him, you need to pick him up because Jonathon Brooks needs to be stashed. He is now a top 10 handcuff in fantasy football. He's got an all-purpose skill set. He was very productive in his one season as the starter at Texas before he tore his ACL. He's an ultra-talented guy, ultra-talented running back. There was a reason why, even though they shouldn't have done it, there was a reason why the Panthers traded up in the second round to take Jonathon Brooks. He'd be much higher on this list if it weren't for coming off the injury and then being in a bad offense. But the Panthers do have a really good fantasy playoff schedule. They got the Cowboys in week 16 or in week 15, the Cardinals in week 16, and the Buccaneers in the fantasy championship. My number 8 handcuff running back is Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt is going to revert back to the bench with Isaiah Pacheco returning in week 12. Now, he might maintain a split backfield with Isaiah Pacheco for the first couple of weeks, but by the time the fantasy playoffs come around, it's going to be full Isaiah Pacheco in that backfield again, which is going to make Kareem Hunt a pure handcuff, which is fine. He's still very valuable in that role. We really couldn't ask for much more from a handcuff running back than what Kareem Hunt has given us this year. He was the RB16 in fantasy points per game, averaging 15.2 fantasy points. He finished inside the top 24 running backs 5 out of 7 games. Now, he hasn't really been efficient. He's actually been pretty inefficient. He's not really explosive. He's not breaking off long runs. Kind of touchdown dependent, but he's in a good offense. He gets a ton of work. It would be the same deal if anything were to happen to Isaiah Pacheco. And if he was more efficient, he'd be higher on this list. But he's not. He's an ancient Kareem Hunt. What do you expect? He gave us way more than we could have ever dreamed of from Kareem Hunt. So he's the number 8 handcuff running back that you need to stash. At number 7 is Zach Charbonnet. We got to see a little bit of Zach Charbonnet with Kenneth Walker out earlier in the season. He assumed a full bell cow role in weeks 2 and 3. He played 91.4% of the snaps. He averaged 16 carries per game, 4.5 targets per game. He had 5 red zone carries, 3 touchdowns over 2 weeks. he scored as the RB8 in week 2, the RB7 in week 3, averaging 22 fantasy points per game over those 2 games. He's a big back with an all-purpose skill set and a quality offense that produces a lot of running back touchdowns. So Zach Charbonnet, an absolute must-stash. I actually saw an article this week. I can't remember the site. They should be embarrassed that they put it out. But somebody was saying you can drop Zach Charbonnet. Don't listen to that advice. You need to stash Zach Charbonnet. If you can afford to roster Zach Charbonnet, you need to be rostering Zach Charbonnet. He is one of the best handcuff running backs in fantasy football. If anything were to happen to Kenneth Walker again, we're going to get a full bell cow role for Zach Charbonnet. He'd be a must-start RB2 with RB1 upside every single week. Coming in number 6 is Trey Benson. Trey Benson's a rookie out of Florida State. He's a 216-pound running back with 4.39 speed and an all-purpose skill set. He's an aggressive runner who doesn't go down easy. He's a big play waiting to happen. I mean, with 4.39 speed, this guy can break off a long run at any moment. We don't get that from James Conner. He may not be quite James Conner between the tackles, but he's going to make up for that by being able to break off chunk plays at any moment. Trey Benson would be awesome. And James Conner, hate to tell you, James Conner is a ticking time bomb. He's an injury waiting to happen. He has never stayed healthy for a full season. He's only played more than 13 games just one time in his career. In the case of a James Conner injury, Trey Benson would immediately slide in as the number 1 running back in Arizona with weekly RB2 upside, or he'd be a weekly RB2 with RB1 upside every single week. He would take the lion's share of the carries and the red zone work. Amari DiMercado would be there as well. I'm not forgetting about Amari DiMercado, but some people are seeing some of the opportunities that Amari DiMercado has gotten over the last several weeks, and they are thinking that Amari DiMercado is the number 2 running back in Arizona. That's not true. Absolutely not true. If anything happens to James Conner, Amari DiMercado's role does not change. He's going to continue to be the passing downs back, the 2-minute drill back. He's going to stay in his lane, where Trey Benson is going to jump right in to take the same workload that James Conner is getting. And you know what? He might even be better. We just talked about his explosiveness. We're not getting 50, 70-yard breakaway runs, even 20-yard chunk plays from James Conner. We're going to get that from Trey Benson. And Arizona has the 3rd easiest fantasy playoff schedule for running backs. It's the Patriots in week 15, the Panthers in week 16, and it's the Rams in week 17. You need to stash Trey Benson. James Conner, like I said, he's a ticking time bomb, and Trey Benson would be a league winner if he ends up atop that depth chart due to a Conner injury. Breaking into the top 5 is Jordan Mason. Now, Mason would be number 1 on this list if it weren't for the emergence of Isaac Guerendo just before Christian McCaffrey came back. Unfortunately, though, as much as I love Isaac Guerendo, he's kind of muddied the Christian McCaffrey contingency plan. It's not quite as clear as it was early in the season that Jordan Mason's the guy. I think it would still probably favor Jordan Mason, but it's more likely to be a split between him and Isaac Guerendo rather than the bell cow situation that we saw in the first 9 weeks of the season. Still, though, Jordan Mason was highly productive in place of Christian McCaffrey. He was RB10 in fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 7, which was before the shoulder injuries. He averaged 14.5 fantasy points per game. He had 18 carries per game. He averaged over 107 total yards from scrimmage per game. He was top 10 in yards per touch, top 10 in evaded tackles per touch. He was top 10 in runs of 15 yards or more. Those are according to playerprofiler.com. So while Isaac Guerendo has muddied the waters a little bit, Jordan Mason is still locked in as a top 5 handcuff running back in fantasy football. Do not drop Jordan Mason, keep him stashed. Number 4 is Roschon Johnson. You just know I love talking some Roschon Johnson. And you know what? Thomas Brown is one of us, baby. Thomas Brown is one of us, the new offensive coordinator in Chicago. Thomas Brown is also a Roschon Johnson truther. He made that clear in week 11. Roschon Johnson played a season high 42% of the snaps in the first game that Thomas Brown took over calling plays in Chicago. He carried the ball 10 times, which matches his season high. He's been a favorite of mine since he's come out of Texas. If you follow anything that I've done at yardsperfantasy.com, right here on the Yards Per Fantasy YouTube channel, you already know that I love me some Roschon Johnson. It's exciting to see his role increasing. He's a 220-pound running back with elite pass protection skills. He can catch passes. I mean, who doesn't love a big running back who can catch passes at a high level? I mean, they're taking DeAndre Swift, who came into the league highly touted as a good pass catching running back. They're taking DeAndre Swift off the field in passing situations in favor of Roschon Johnson. What do you think is going to happen if DeAndre Swift is out? Roschon Johnson is going to maintain that role and then some. So if Swift were to go down, Roschon's going to be the full-blown bell cow. He'd get the between the tackles work. He'd get the red zone work. He'd get the passing downs work. He'd essentially be doing exactly what Chase Brown is doing right now over the last few weeks in Cincinnati since Zach Moss has gone down. Chase Brown has taken 100% of the running back opportunities in Cincinnati since Zach Moss went down. I think we'd see a pretty similar thing from Roschon Johnson if anything were to happen to DeAndre Swift. Roschon Johnson is flying under the radar. Not a lot of people like Roschon Johnson. I don't understand why. You got to go pick him up. You got to stash him. Roschon Johnson can even give you a little bit of standalone value, but he could be a league winner if anything were to happen to Swift. Go get Roschon Johnson. Keep him stashed. Breaking into the top 3 is Tyler Allgeier. He's just a really good running back. That's all he is. He's a really good running back. That's why there's been moments throughout the season where it's been a little bit frustrating for Bijan Robinson managers taking Bijan off the field in favor of Tyler Allgeier. Now that's kind of faded a little bit over the last few weeks because just Bijan is just so damn good, but it's hard to keep Tyler Allgeier off the field. We've seen this across multiple coaching staffs at this point. They just love Tyler Allgeier. So what do you think is going to happen if anything happens to Bijan Robinson? We saw this in 2022, pre-Bijan Robinson era. Tyler Allgeier averaged about 5 yards per carry during that season on 210 carries. He ran for over 1,000 yards. That was his rookie season. He wasn't really the guy until the last 6 weeks or so of the year. He was dominant. He was dominant during that stretch. He would be the bell cow in the case of a Bijan Robinson injury. He'd have weekly top 12 fantasy running back upside. And if you look at the playoff schedule for the Falcons, they have the 5th easiest schedule for running backs during the fantasy playoffs. It's the Raiders, it's the Giants, and it's the Commanders. Tyler Allgeier would be a league winner. As would number 2, Blake Corum, baby. Blake Corum. Blake Corum was my number 2 or my number 1 handcuff running back coming into the season. Now, he still maintains that same massive upside that he did back then. If anything were to happen to Kyren Williams, Blake Corum would be the league winner of all league winners. And Kyren Williams, I hate to tell you, Kyren Williams is a major injury risk. He's 195 pounds. He's got a massive workload for 2 straight seasons. And there have been weeks this year where he's taken 99% of the snaps. They are running Kyren Williams into the ground, and injury is almost inevitable at this point. So if he goes down, Blake Corum becomes the full-blown bell cow in the Rams offense. He would assume the full Kyren Williams role. And we know Sean McVay prefers to ride one running back. We've seen it with Todd Gurley. We've seen it with Henderson. Why can't it Darrell Henderson? We've seen it now with Kyren Williams for 2 straight years, and it's continued again this year multiple times. If you listen to the broadcasters on Rams games this year, multiple crews have told us that Sean McVay has told them that he wants to get Blake Corum mixed in a little bit more. He wants more of a split backfield, but he just can't help himself. He can't help himself. He's continued to just force feed touches to his RB1. And that would be Blake Corum if he became the guy. Just force feeding touches to Blake Corum, just like he's doing for Kyren Williams. And Blake Corum can handle it. Blake Corum can absolutely handle that workload. He did it at Michigan, so we know he can do it. He's also bigger, stronger. He's more explosive than Kyren Williams, so he may even be more productive and less touchdown dependent than Kyren Williams. Blake Corum, I'm rooting for you, baby. Hashtag Team Corum. We're still here. We're still here. We're not going away. Blake Corum is your number 2 handcuff running back. And that means number 1 is Ray Davis. Ray Davis. We've seen it already with Ray Davis, which is why he's been able to get to number 1 on these handcuff running back rankings. When James Cook missed week 6 against the Jets, Ray Davis took 20 carries in that game. He got 3 passes. He had 152 total yards from scrimmage, and he had 18.2 fantasy points. And that was without a touchdown. And we know James Cook has scored 11 this year, so there are plenty of running back touchdowns available in the Buffalo offense. So imagine 152 total yards plus a touchdown or 2 from Ray Davis. Ooh, baby. Ooh, baby. Let's go, Ray Davis. And Davis, he's an exceptional receiver out of the backfield. I've talked about it before. I think James Cook is an overrated receiver out of the backfield. Ray Davis is actually really, really good in that area. So I'd expect a significant role as a pass catcher for Ray Davis if he were to become the guy. Now, I know there are some concerns about Ty Johnson, but he, just like I said with Amari DiMercato, Ty Johnson would maintain his current role. And that's not a projection. We saw exactly that in week 6 when James Cook missed. Ty Johnson maintained his usual role, exactly what he's done all year long. Ray Davis jumped right into that James Cook role, even exceeded it, took a ton of carries, ton of touches. He was the guy. So I do have a few more handcuff running backs. I just wanted to give you my top 10. Outside of my top 10, it's Jalen Wright at 11, Dameon Pierce at 12, Tank Bigsby, Isaac Guarendo, Keaton Mitchell, Cam Akers, Kenneth Walker, Khalil Herbert, Gus Edwards, and Tyjae Spears would be my top 20 handcuff running backs. Now, there are also a few guys who are considered more than a handcuff. They're not the starter. They're not the guy in their backfield, but they're more of a split situation more than a handcuff. Now, of course, they do still have that contingency upside where if anything were to happen to their backfield mate, they would probably be league winners as well. But these guys are rostered anyway. That's your Bucky Irvings of the world, your Jalen Warren, Raheem Mostert, Justice Hill. These guys are already rostered, but their roles would increase for sure if anything were to happen to the starters in their backfield.